I'm sitting on the porch of a house I can barely afford to heat in the winter. Rocking chair, peeling paint on the railing, a glass of sweet tea that went warm an hour ago. The yard needs cutting, has for 3 weeks. I keep telling myself I'll get to it tomorrow. I never do. From here I can see the old mill building 2 miles down the road. Red brick, 6 stories. Stood there since 1911. My grandfather built it. My father ran it. I destroyed it. The windows are boarded up now, some of them broken. Kids throw rocks. The town let a developer put a historical marker out front 2 years ago. Bronze plaque. Talks about the mill's contribution to Charlotte's textile heritage. Doesn't mention the 400 people I laid off in 1997. Doesn't mention the families who lost their houses. Doesn't mention what happened after. I'm 64 years old. I look 75. People who knew me back when I was running things say they almost don't recognize me. I believe them. I barely recognize myself in the mirror anymore. My wife of 31 years lives in a condo in Raleigh now. My son manages a grocery store in Asheville. My daughter teaches elementary school in Virginia. They call on holidays, sometimes. Christmas for sure. Easter sometimes. Birthdays if they remember the time difference. My son is in the same time zone, but it doesn't matter. Distance isn't always about miles. I grew up inside that mill. Not literally, but close enough. My father would bring me on Saturdays when I was small. I'd walk the floor while he did his rounds. The noise was overwhelming. Hundreds of looms running simultaneously. A mechanical roar that you felt in your chest, your teeth, your bones. Cotton dust floating in the shafts of light that came through the tall windows. The smell of machine oil and raw fiber. The women at the looms didn't look up when we walked by. Focused, precise, their hands moving faster than I could follow. My father knew every one of their names, their husbands' names, their children's names. He'd stop and talk, ask about a sick mother, remember a birthday. He was the boss, but he was also part of the community. That mill wasn't just a business. It was the center of everything for miles around. Church, school, the company store. People lived in houses the mill owned, sent their kids to a school the mill funded, worshipped in a church my grandfather built and donated to the town. Cotton mills in the South weren't just factories. They were whole worlds, complete ecosystems built around a single industry. My father died in 1979, heart attack at his desk on a Tuesday afternoon in March. He was 61. His secretary found him. I was 32 years old and suddenly responsible for everything. 480 employees, 3 buildings, equipment ranging from 20 years old to nearly 60, contracts with department stores and garment manufacturers all up and down the East Coast. A payroll I wasn't sure I could make. I was not ready. My father knew I wasn't ready. We'd argued about it for years. He wanted to slow down and transition gradually, bring me in step by step, teach me everything. I kept telling him we had time. There's always time. Until there isn't. I spent the first 2 years just trying to understand what I'd inherited. The finances, the contracts, the equipment, the relationships with vendors and buyers. My father had kept everything in his head and in handwritten ledgers that took me months to decode. I hired people to help, an accountant, an operations manager, a sales director. Good people, smart people. but it still fell to me to make the decisions. And I made them badly at first. Lost 2 contracts in the first year because I didn't move fast enough to renegotiate terms. Let equipment go unmaintained because I didn't understand what needed attention. My father's foreman, a man named Earl, who'd been at the mill for 38 years, watched me make mistake after mistake and kept his mouth shut. Finally, one afternoon, he knocked on my office door and sat across from me and said, with complete calm, "Son, you're going to run this place into the ground if you don't start listening." He said it without meanness, without judgment, just fact. I listened. He became the most important person in my professional life for the next decade. With Earl's guidance, I started to find my footing. By 1984, we were turning a real profit. I'd modernized some of the equipment, won back the contracts I'd lost, added new clients in the Southeast. I hired aggressively. By 1986, we had 560 employees. The mill was producing more finished fabric per month than at any point in its 75-year history. I was proud of that. I let myself be proud. Took my wife Margaret to dinner at the nicest restaurant in Charlotte to celebrate. Told her we'd made it, that the worst was behind us, that we were solid. She smiled and squeezed my hand and said she was proud of me. I still remember exactly how she looked that night, how the candlelight caught her face. I was so sure everything was going to be fine. The work was still consuming, still all-consuming. The mill didn't run itself. There were always problems, always crises. A loom breaking down at 3 a.m. and someone calling the house. A shipment of raw cotton coming in wrong grade and having to renegotiate with the supplier. A buyer threatening to walk over pricing. I was there for all of it, 7 days a week. My wife raised our 2 kids mostly alone during those years. James was born in 1976, Claire in 1979. Both born into a family where the father was present in the house, but absent in every way that mattered. I came home for dinner when I could, sat at the table, ate, listened to half of what they said, then went to my study to work. I coached James's Little League team for 1 season, 1985. We lost every game. I missed 4 practices, showed up late to 6 others. At the end of the season, James said he didn't want to play the next year, said it wasn't fun anymore. I told myself it was because they lost too much, but I knew. Even then I knew. Margaret never yelled at me about it. That was her way. She didn't fight. She didn't give ultimatums. She just quietly kept everything running without me. Kept the house. Kept the kids. Kept the social obligations I was always too tired to meet. She covered for me at school events, made excuses for me at church. Told the other families I was working, so sorry, he wishes he could be here. She built a life that functioned without me at the center of it. And I let her. It was easier that way. Let her run one world while I ran another. We'd meet in the evenings, talk about practical things, bills, schedules, what the kids needed. But the real conversations stopped somewhere in the mid-'80s. The ones where you say what you're actually feeling, what you're afraid of, what you want. Those conversations just stopped, and neither of us said anything about it. Then NAFTA passed in 1993. I remember exactly where I was when I understood what it meant for us. Sitting in a conference room in Charlotte at a trade association meeting. A lawyer from Washington explaining the provisions, the tariff reductions on imported textiles, the opening of Mexican and then Chinese markets. I sat there and did the math in my head. The math was brutal. American textile workers made $12 to $15 an hour. Mexican workers made $2. Chinese workers made less. There was no way to compete on price. Not with our cost structure, not with our equipment, not with our union contracts. I drove home that night and sat in the driveway for 40 minutes. Didn't go inside, just sat there, trying to figure out what I was going to do. I spent the next 2 years trying everything. Cut costs wherever I could, renegotiated vendor contracts, eliminated middle management, pushed for productivity increases on the floor, invested in newer equipment that could run faster with fewer operators, lost 24 employees to the efficiency improvements. They didn't leave quietly. There were protests, signs outside the mill, people I'd known my whole life standing in the parking lot holding signs with my name on them. Earl retired in 1994, came into my office and handed me his keys and said he was too old to watch what was coming. I shook his hand and he left, and I sat alone in that office and stared at the wall for a long time. By 1995, I was losing money. Not a lot at first, but consistently, every month. The big department store chains were switching to overseas suppliers. The garment manufacturers were moving their operations to Mexico. My buyers were apologetic, said they had no choice. Their margins were being squeezed, too. I went to the bank, got extended credit, leveraged the mill buildings, leveraged my house. Margaret didn't know about the house for 3 months. When she found out, she sat across from me at the kitchen table and asked if we were going to lose it. I told her probably not. Probably. She looked at me for a long moment and then went to bed. She didn't ask again. I think she already knew the answer. I laid off 100 workers in January 1996. The worst day of my life up to that point. Sat in the conference room all day and called them in one at a time. Good people. People who'd worked for my father. People whose parents had worked for my grandfather. A woman named Dorothy who'd been at the mill for 32 years. She didn't cry, just took the envelope with the severance check and said she'd pray for me. That was worse than anger. The anger came from others. A man named Ray, who'd worked the night shift for 18 years, threw the envelope back across the table and called me things I won't repeat. He was right to. I didn't argue. The mill closed in March 1997, the final shutdown. I stood on the floor on the last day and watched the looms go silent for the first time in 86 years. 400 people out of work in a county that had no other major employer. Some found jobs in Charlotte, some moved away, some never really recovered. I heard about it over the years. The divorces, the drinking, a few deaths too young from stress and despair. People don't count those as casualties of trade policy, but that's what they were. Margaret filed for divorce in 1999, 2 years after the mill closed. I'd spent those 2 years trying to figure out what to do next. Consulting, failed business ventures, a small investment that went nowhere. We were living on savings. The house had been refinanced twice. She waited longer than she should have. I know that now. She waited to see if I'd come back to her after the mill was gone, if I'd finally be present. If the thing that had taken me away my entire marriage was gone, would I return? I didn't. Even with nothing to work on, nothing to run, nothing to build, I was still absent. Still in my head, still somewhere else. She packed her things on a Saturday in October. James and Claire helped her, both of them. They loaded her car and drove with her to her sister's house in Raleigh. James came back to get the rest of her boxes the next day. He didn't look at me while he carried them out. Claire called me a week later, said she loved me, said she understood it was complicated. But there was something in her voice that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite anger. Something that said she wasn't surprised. James and I haven't had a real conversation in 4 years. We speak. He calls when he has to. Christmas. My birthday sometimes. I called him when I was in the hospital last spring. Chest pains. Turned out to be nothing serious. He drove up from Asheville, stayed 2 hours, sat in the chair next to my bed and looked at his phone mostly. When I was discharged, he walked me to my car and said to take care of myself and drove home. I stood in the hospital parking lot alone and watched his truck until I couldn't see it anymore. Claire is warmer. She inherited that from Margaret. She calls every few weeks, asks real questions. How am I sleeping? Am I eating? Do I see any friends? I tell her I'm fine. We both know it's not entirely true. She invited me to Thanksgiving last year. Her husband's family was there, 15 people around a table. I sat at the corner and felt like a guest in a life that should have been mine. I left before dessert, said I wasn't feeling well. She hugged me at the door and held on for a second longer than necessary, like she was trying to give me something. The town changed. Charlotte grew, became a banking city, finance, tech, new people, new buildings. The neighborhoods around the old mill got bought up by developers, hip restaurants in buildings that used to be warehouses, young professionals in condos where mill workers used to live. The history of the place swallowed up by new money and new industries. I don't blame them. Progress goes where it goes. But sometimes I drive past and see people eating brunch in what used to be a dye house, and I feel something I can't name. Not anger exactly. More like vertigo. Earl died in 2018. His daughter called to tell me. I went to the funeral. Small church outside of town. Full. Standing room. People came from 3 counties to pay respects. His daughter spoke, said her father had given his life to the mill, said it was his second home, his second family. She looked at me when she said it, not with accusation, just with meaning. I sat in the back pew and thought about everything he taught me, everything I'd done with it, everything I'd lost. I don't regret building. I don't regret trying. I inherited something, and I tried to protect it, tried to save it against forces I couldn't control. What I regret is all the space around the trying, all the dinners I didn't eat at the table, all the games I didn't watch, all the conversations I didn't have with Margaret because I was always thinking about something else. I chose the mill as my whole world, and when the mill was gone, I had nothing. No relationships deep enough to sustain me. No person in my life who'd been let all the way in. I built walls my whole career to keep the fear and the vulnerability out. And when the walls finally came down, there was nobody inside them with me. Margaret remarried 3 years ago, a retired pharmacist named Gerald. I heard from Claire. They travel, take cruises, have friends for dinner. She looked happy in the photos Claire showed me. Really happy. The way I don't remember her looking in the last decade of our marriage. Gerald gives her his full attention. I know this because Claire told me. Said her mother said he actually listens when she talks. That sentence stayed with me. Actually listens. As if it were remarkable. As if it were unusual. For her, with me, it had been. The cotton is still growing somewhere. farms in Georgia and Texas. Someone is still weaving fabric, just not here, not in this town, not in that mill. The looms are rusted now, probably. The building's going to be torn down eventually. Some developer will put luxury apartments there, put a bar on the ground floor and call it the loom or the mill, and serve craft cocktails to people who have no idea what the place used to be. I won't be around to see it, probably. At 64, with the chest pains I've been having, I don't make long-term plans anymore. I sit here on this porch most evenings, watch the light change over the mill building in the distance. The way the late afternoon sun hits the red brick and turns it almost warm. Almost the color of the cotton dust that used to float through those windows on Saturday mornings when my father walked the floor and knew every person's name. I was 8 years old then. I didn't know yet what I was inheriting, didn't know the weight of it, didn't know what it would cost. I'd give anything to be 8 years old again, walking that floor beside my father, listening to the looms, watching his hands, learning what he was trying to teach me before I was ready to learn it. Not about fabric or contracts or production numbers, about the other things, the things that last, the things that matter when everything else is gone.